In this video, I'm going to be describing how to design a certificate template. A template will be required for each vital event, so births, deaths, and marriages. And there's 5 kind of key steps that you need to consider. First one, gather requirements. So you need to research and define what registration data you want to show on the certificate. Introducing a digital CRVS system is a great opportunity to rethink what actually is required on the paper certificate. With a digital registry, the source of the truth is in the database. So you can consider a more partial set of information on the paper certificate. So it's a good opportunity to rethink what do we actually require on the paper certificate. Step 2 is about designing the certificate template, and we'll go into a lot of detail on this in this video. Highlight some help and advice and tips and tricks you should consider when doing so. Step 3. It's really important to review your design with stakeholders. There's often a lot of back and forth to finalize the design. This is because once you export it into SVG, this is the file format that is required in OpenCRVS, it can be difficult to make changes later on. So once it's been designed, and we'll go into detail on this call, and you have a final design, really important to have those rounds of reviews and make sure all stakeholders have signed off on the certificate. After that, yes, you're exporting into SVG, and that's where there's a configuration step. You have to configure this SVG file, and my colleague Ewan goes into a lot more detail in a separate video on that configuration process, which involves adding the handlebars. This is where the dynamic data is, we use handlebars to define where dynamic data needs to show on the paper certificate. So that's a really important step, which really happens after the design of the certificate has been defined. The design being what images do we want, what's the layout, what's the fonts, what's the colors. The configuration step is really about updating the SVG code to define and add the dynamic data, the handlebars. Yes. So yeah, on this video, we're going to go into a lot of detail about the actual design process. So please refer to these kind of help and advice section. Some of the tips and tricks from what we've learned from configuring existing certificates. So the core team uses Design OpenCRVS and Design the Certificate. You could also use Adobe Illustrator, but Figma is a great option. It's free. It works on Windows, Mac, and you can even use it in the browser, such as Google Chrome. So yeah, check out Figma to create your certificate template. So the best way to do this is looking at existing examples. We have an example here from Somalia. This is what we were given. This is their existing certificate. And you can see on the right, this is what we redesigned it to. So the first thing you need to ask yourself is, are we allowed to? Can we redesign the certificate? Can we create a completely new template? Or do we need to keep to the existing template? A lot of the times what you'll find is with existing templates, they don't have the original source file that was used to create this. It also might have been created in Word, which isn't, you can't export to SVG Word documents. So yeah, first question you need to ask yourself, can we hopefully rethink the certificate create a more smarter layout, or do we need to keep to the existing design? If you're having to keep to the existing design and you don't have the source file, what this will mean is you're going to have to recreate this pixel to it as pixel perfect as possible. And it's going to show how we've done that in the past. What we've done is we've taken the scan. Often this is just a scan. We don't even have like a PDF version. So this is like a scan of the paper certificate. And then I've added this to an A4 page. I'm going to try and center it as much as possible. And then what I need to do, I essentially now need to recreate this in Figma. So I add in like, let's see, in Cabinet, I'm going to try and recreate this bit of text here. Dal Ashada. I'm having to work out what the font is. I'm going to put Times for now, just as a see if that works. I'm going to drop the background image. There we go. So the font's not quite right, so it can take time, is what I'm trying to describe, to get this, to work out the exact existing fonts, trying to make sure this fits. There's clearly some issue here, So it's going to take time, but that's essentially the approach you kind of have to take. Recreating this pixel by pixel, we can add the boxes here. Background, I'm going to put a little stroke. Try and get it nicely lined up. Get the next box. So hopefully you get the picture. I'm recreating the layout and adding all the images, adding all the static text to recreate the template. Another option you might be thinking is, can we not just use this as a background image? So basically have this whole thing as an image, but the quality is not very good. So this image is going to be printed out on each certificate. The text isn't quite clear. You can even see, because this is seems to be a screenshot from Word, you're getting the spelling mistakes. Obviously it's not English, so it's coming up as red. So you obviously don't want those on the final certificate. So yeah, the quality is not very good. I can't use this as a background image and just add in, and we'll come onto this, the handlebars for the child's name. There we go. Let's put this regular. So this is an example of me putting the handlebars. There's two ways of doing this. You can either write the handlebars or just adding a dummy name. So Jonathan Smith, which will be updated when we export to SVG and configured to include the handlebar. So yeah, two options. If you're having to use the existing certificate template and you don't have the original source file and it was created in Word, you take the existing template, use it as a background image, and then add the dummy data to show where you want the registration data to populate. So this would be the date of birth. Or, as I said at the start, we can use this. I'm dropping the opacity so I can use it as a reference, and I'm recreating every single element line by line. Element by element. I can add in a higher resolution PNG of the logo, get it all lined up. So I'm kind of trying to create a one-to-one representation. So yeah, and you can see that's quite complex. Takes a lot longer. So hopefully, and we recommend, it's a great opportunity to rethink this certificate template, rethink what registration data needs to show on the certificate, rethink the layout, rethink a smarter layout, because historically a lot, these certificates have been designed to be handwritten, completed by hand. That's why there's these boxes, dotted lines. With a digital CRBS system, where the certificate is automatically generated by the system, where data is automatically populated, you don't need lines, you don't need boxes, because the system can write on a straight line. So that's the first consideration you need to consider, and that would influence your approach to design the certificate. So yeah, this is what we came up with Somalia, and I'm just going to talk through some of the elements you see on here. This is static data, this doesn't change, but obviously we have a dummy name here, and I use the handlebars just to differentiate it. So here we've got the Somalia local language and English. You can even choose to have 3 languages, as many, you can put whatever you want in terms of the static text. And then we've used this kind of dummy to illustrate what would show in terms of what needs to be populated into the certificate. Other things to call out is the QR code. So if you want to use our verify certificate feature, you need to, it can be any image. Obviously, I've added in a QR image. This is just a dummy image placeholder, which again gets updated when the certificate is configured later on. But obviously make sure it's a square box, as QR codes are square. You then need to have, if you want to use digital signatures of the registrar, you need to include a placeholder image. So we just got this dummy image block here. Again, that gets updated, that gets configured later on, and we add in the handlebar to replace this with the registrar who registered this record. So yeah, we've gone for, in terms of the design, try to keep it very simple and clear so it's easily readable. Fonts are a good size. We go for like 12 point, as much, that's the lowest we hope we go for the main content. So it's nice and easy to read. And with this design, we made sure the text does not need to wrap, and we'll come on to in another example why this increases the complexity of the configuration. So we found like the longest name in Somalia, an example of it, and we made sure we've got lots of characters here, because what we don't want to do is obviously go off the page, but in this design we don't want it to, if I can show you, wrap. So in SVG you can allow text to wrap, but it involves a lot more configuration. So we've designed this template so that everything is on one line. You can see here, obviously, the date will never have to wrap. And when I mean wrap, it means go onto multiple lines automatically. Male and female, that's fine. For this one, we write the town or village. If it was a community birth, or if it was in the hospital, then the hospital will show. So it'll either be hospital or town and village in the final printed certificate. So we've got lots of space here for long town or village names, and if it's short village name, then we don't have to worry. Similarly for district and state, we looked at their reference data and made sure the longest district, this is a long district name, and the long district state name fit on one line. So we don't have to worry if it goes on to 2 lines. We designed it to make sure every single scenario, every single district and state combination can fit on one line. And then we have Somalia. So where this becomes tricky is if we look at this example here. This is an existing certificate template. It's not your standard format. It's actually A4, kind of cut that way. If it's landscape, it's cut that way. And you can see here we've got these very defined boxes of where data is expected to show. So when it's handwritten, that's the registrar can decide to obviously write on the side. They can choose to add something, a bit of data onto one line or move it onto a second. When you're writing it, you have a lot of freedom to choose. When you're expecting a digital system to populate this, it becomes a little bit harder. So we've got text on the side here. That's fine. The tricky thing comes with wrapping of text. So you can see St. Francis Hospital in Zambia. This is wrapping onto multiple lines. So you need to configure the SVG for this bit of dynamic data to do that. It doesn't happen automatically. And you need to make sure, and then you're then going to need to test for all the different hospital names and locations to make sure it wraps accordingly. So we're to date made sure it just stays on one line. In core, we're starting to test and understand how, if there's an expectation that content has to wrap into multiple lines, it just makes the configuration of the certificate far more complex, and we have to create much more test scenarios to make sure the certificate works correctly. Maybe an example to highlight this is in this box. So the black boxes are just hiding PII, just so removing any personal identifiable information. This is a good example here. So you've got nationality of parents. We've got this clearly defined box, so it's expected that all the content stays in the box. We don't want it to overflow into over bits of content. We have this static piece of text here, so father. By static, I mean it will never change. We have this dynamic piece of data, Ugandan, so this will change. You know, if it's from United Kingdom, that's going to be different, a different length of characters. Mother is static, and then we have dynamic. So father, and then Ugandan. If this is United Kingdom, as I said, it might wrap onto two lines, which is going to push mother and Ugandan down. And if it's on one line, then it can be at this level. So that's quite complex when you're configuring the SVG, and you're going to have to test for what happens if this nationality is very long and it goes onto 3 lines, then the mother and everything has to push down or push up. Yeah, you'll quickly learn when you come to configuring. And as I said, my colleague Ewan describes how you add the handlebars on the complexity of that. Other things to consider in this design here, you've got, there's only so much space between here and the starting, the start of country of. So you need to make sure you find the longest division. What's the longest potential division name? What's the longest amount of characters? And make sure that you choose a font that fits in this gap. So that longest name fits here. Sometimes that means you're reducing the font so small that it becomes too small to read. So you need to find either moving above or below this section to make sure it doesn't overlap any other text. So yeah, to summarize, trying to get a digital system to populate an existing certificate designed to be completed by hand, where that existing certificate was not, the design of it wasn't really considered for a digital system. It makes it a lot harder, and why we always recommend it's an opportunity to think again and consider a smarter layout. Another thing to call out on this example here is it's printed on security paper. So the red boxes, this kind of wavy pattern is part of the security paper. So that's what gets delivered to registration officers, and they put that into the printer, and then the data is printed on top of it. So in your certificate template file, you don't need to include that background image because you don't want to print it onto what's already on the paper. So this is actually what the template looks for this design. So that's worth calling out. Maybe looking at another example. For Mali, there's this similar kind of long form, and there's a lot of content on the certificate. There's like the age of the parents, where they live, their profession. So there's a lot of details about the registration on their paper certificate. For this design, we considered, this is actually A5, but we considered a much smaller subset of information. So on this certificate, we just have the registration number, the name of the child, when they were born, place of birth, and where this event was registered, plus the digital signature of the registrar. We don't need to include all this information because the source of it is in a digital registry, which is easily searchable. So anyone looking at this certificate can scan the QR code and visit the truth. The paper certificate is just a certified copy. The real truth of the registration lives in the digital registry, which is now easily searchable. So you can find the record much more easily and see the registration data in the digital system. Historically, in a paper-based world, the source of truth is in a registry book in an office, which is hard to difficult to get to, and then even if you're there, it can be difficult to find the exact registration quickly and easily. So that's why certificates have often included all the data about the registration. Using a digital system like OpenCRVS, it's not as important anymore. So that's this is an example how we've reduced the amount of data on the certificate. Maybe finally we can talk about Frageland certificates to also highlight some other bits to consider. Again, Frageland is our example country we use to demonstrate OpenCRVS functionality. So we have the birth, death, and marriage certificate. Not much else to maybe mention on birth. We've got our registration number, we've got the full name of the child, the sex. Place of birth, we've chosen to have district or hospital, so there's some dynamic choice of what data to show here, which gets configured when we update the SVG, and I'll show you that in a sec. We've just gone for the full name of the mother, full name of the father, place of registration, date of registration, and who it was registered by. We've then got date of certification. So the date of registration could be different from the date of certification. So that's why we include this. So when was it registered by the registrar? And then when was it printed? Could be a different date, so we wanted to make that clear. Place of certification as well in Frageland. You can print the certificate in a different location from where it was registered. So it was registered in Mbombo District Office. And in this case, because it's just dummy data, it was also certified in Mbombo. But in Frageland, you can certify it wherever you want. So the informant can visit any office and request a certificate. So that's why it's important on this that we show that it was certified in a different location potentially. In OpenCRVS, we have MOSIP integration, and here we're pulling in the MOSIP application ID number and putting on the certificate for demonstration purposes. And then we use digital signatures, so here's the placeholder digital signature, which gets updated with the actual signature of the registrar when we generate the certificate for the event. And we have the registrar name as well here. Death, very much the same. We have slightly different information, obviously, because it's a different event. And then for marriage, the only thing to call out maybe that's worth noting is that you can include the signature of the bride and groom on the certificate. So this is a requirement we've seen in other countries. So you can capture the digital signature of the bride and groom in the declaration form. That signature is then pulled through and included on the certificate if you so wish. If you want the bride and groom to hand sign the marriage certificate, then you just don't include, just make sure you leave a placeholder for that hand signature. Well, in Frageland, we use those digital signatures captured in the declaration form. Maybe last couple of things. So yeah, you can look at the help and advice section. It's going to help you a lot in terms of understanding what to consider. You can use any imagery, so image of the country emblem, any kind of background images. Just make sure the background image, the text is still readable. There's still enough contrast on any background images, so it's still easy to read. In terms of fonts, yep, you can choose any fonts as long as you have the .tiff file, the source file, which needs to be uploaded and added to your country repository package so that the fonts properly load. Don't add lots of fonts. Try to keep them, maximum, 3. We use just 2 here: a bold and a light font variant. So just so it keeps the design look and feel consistent. So it's nice and clear and readable. Obviously, if you're having to work with an existing certificate template, this one actually is okay. It just uses one font. Sometimes you get lots of different fonts, and you have to find out what font was used. In this example here, we were trying to work out what font this was. I thought it was Times New. It might be, maybe it's Times New Roman. So let's just try that again. Maybe it looks like it's a bit bold, doesn't it? So there's that. I'm gonna try and increase it. Okay, it's kind of there, maybe. So yeah, like I said, trying to recreate an existing design, increase the time and complexity of configuring the certificate. So you have to work out the font, and then make sure you have access to that source font. Obviously, a lot of the time, existing certificates uses Arial, Times New Roman, so shouldn't be any problem sourcing that from Google Fonts, etc. So yeah, that ends this video on designing a certificate. My colleague Ewan will talk about the exporting of the SVG. I will actually mention, maybe just to dovetail with his video, when you export from Figma, you do so in the bottom right here. You need to make sure it's selected to SVG, and then you see these advanced export settings. You need to make sure outline text is off. It's an important step to include before you export it. This just makes sure that the text stays text. Sometimes when you export to SVG, it's going to change it into a shape. Just make sure outline text is off, so you can then update the SVG. I'll end on showing you what the SVG looks like. So I'm going to jump into Visual Studio Code. So I've exported and I've uploaded and I've opened the SVG in Visual Studio Code. And what you saw in Figma here is now represented as code here. And it's from here where you're going to be adding the handlebar, which defines the dynamic data, the registration data from the digital registry. Let's look at one example. This text bit here, this is the color of the text, this is the font, this is the size of the font, this is the font weight, so this is a bit of bold font, any kind of letter spacing. This is the location of where it appears on the page, and this is the text, place of certification, redeliverance. This is a bit of static text, so this is always the same on every single certificate. Whereas if we look below, this bit here is defining where that MOSIP ID shows, and that's the handlebar for the MOSIP ID. So at this location, we're going to populate the MOSIP ID for this registration here. Again, my colleague Ewan will link to it, his video, and yeah, please refer to that to better understand the configuration of of that final step of configuring the certificate once the design is being confirmed. Thank you.